Welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and I'm here to help you excel through the stories you tell. But being a compelling business storyteller is hard for some because it takes focused, deliberate practice. That's why I consult, teach, coach, and speak internationally, helping leaders just like you become confident and persuasive communicators, to help you connect with audiences like you never have before, and to excite them to action. I would be delighted to bring you and your team one of my in-person or virtual storytelling mastery classes or mastery course. Or you can even take advantage of my ABTs of Selling online training right now. Either way, please let me know when I can bring the business of story to your world. And until then, enjoy today's show. I'm so glad you're here. Have we got a show for you today? Carla Johnson and I have been running in the same circles for, almost a decade. But we've never really had a chance to sit down and get acquainted until this particular episode. The trigger for our conversation is Carla's new book, Rethink Innovation: How the World's Most Prolific Innovators Come Up with Great Ideas That Deliver Extraordinary Outcomes. But do you feel like one of those innovators? A creator, someone that can really do outstanding things out there? Or do you feel like you got to have a name that ends in like Einstein, Jobs, Musk, Curie, whatever? Well, Carla believes this innovative process is inside all of us. All we have to do is awaken to it, tell ourselves a bit of a different story, and overcome some of the obstacles that stand in our way.
The world's most innovative thinkers and creative thinkers also are highly, highly observant people. I always wave this around. You can't see it on the podcast, but my cell phone. It is one of the most detrimental things to innovative thinking that we have because it absorbs every spare moment. We give it too much time and attention. And all of the time that we spend on a phone or on our computer, on email, on social media, on all of these things, it narrows what we notice in the world.
Carla Johnson is a world-renowned storyteller and entertaining speaker and a prolific author. Having lived, worked, and keynoted on 5 continents, Carla's partnered with top brands and conferences to train thousands of people how to rethink the work they do and the impact they can have. Her visionary expertise has inspired and equipped leaders at all levels to embrace change, welcome new ideas, and transform their business. Her work with Fortune 500 brands serve as the foundation for many of her books. Her 10th, Rethink Innovation, busts the myth that innovation is something that requires a specific degree or special training. In fact, Carla explains why, to be a successful company in today's hyper-competitive, customer-driven world, finding opportunities through innovative thinking must be everyone's business. Her goal is to teach 1 million people how to become innovative thinkers by 2025. So let's get her one step closer to that goal by sharing with you her approach to innovation on today's Business of Story. Carla, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Park. It's so great to be here.
It is just awesome to finally meet you. Although we've never met in person, your name has popped up ever since I started this podcast 6.5 years ago, starting with Jay Baer over at Convince and Convert, who helped me with the initial launch of it. And then a mutual customer client of ours, Sean Schroeder, said, I've been working with Carla. He's a huge fanboy of your work, and I've been following you all of these years. It's so great to finally have you on the show.
Oh, thank you, Park. And you just mentioned 2 of my favorite people, Jay Baer and Sean Schroeder. They're fantastic storytellers themselves. So it is fun after all of these years to be able to sit down and talk with you.
All these years and 10 books later, you just came out with Rethink Innovation: How the World's Most Prolific Innovators Come Up with Great Ideas That Deliver Extraordinary Outcomes. Thank you for sending me the book. I got a chance to go through it during the holidays, and I kept saying to myself, I got to get her on the show, And then you tweeted, you were on LinkedIn. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and you were talking about experience. And that we have to like turn our focus away from marketing for a moment and really focus on that experience that your customers have. That's when I said, I need to experience your goodness on the show. So thank you for being here.
That's so great. Thank you.
So you talk about innovation. A little bit of your backstory. Your experience learning came in the architectural world. Is that right?
It did. It did. I actually studied electrical engineering the first 2 years in university, and it was because I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do in college, but I'm the youngest of five, and they're all very left brain engineers type people. And I thought, well, I'm good at math and science. It sounds like it'd be a good thing to study, and didn't care for it. But along the way, I got a job. I've always been comfortable with writing. And so I got a job in marketing for an architecture firm. And that was, I think, as a marketer, one of the best experiences I could have had. And also a salesperson, because I ended up doing business development in the profession later. But one of the things I loved that I learned from the architecture profession is from design architects. And when they sit down with a client to talk about a new building or space or renovation, whatever, one of the first questions they ask is, how do you want people to feel when they experience this space? And for me, that was a fundamental thing that made such a difference for me as a marketer, because I started to think, what do I want people to feel when they even read this white paper, attend this webinar, read an annual report, whatever it is. And I think as marketers, coming from that perspective, it's very different from what we're taught in university or through an MBA program or whatever. And 10 years later, I moved into the telecom profession, and oh my gosh, was that a completely different can of worms. And it was, all of a sudden people weren't telling stories. They were talking about features and benefits and price and things like that. And I felt like, where have you people been? Like, don't you know anything about how to build that rapport and tell the story? And they didn't. They only knew how to talk about the features and benefits and the brand and things like that. So it was pretty eye-opening, and it's been an amazing time to really move into storytelling. And I think especially in B2B, which is my focus, is to watch the shift that we've seen toward more emotion-driven, story-driven kind of marketing, which is fantastic.
Well, as my listeners know, one of my mantras is, your stories are not about what you make, but what you make happen in people's lives. It's always about that experience. Now, in your new book, Rethink Innovation, you're talking about, how can we experience innovation, not only in triggering it in our own lives and in our careers, but thinking about the experience that our customers are going to have when we do this. Has innovation always been kind of a central theme of yours?
I think it's been a strong second thread. I think the one common theme that I've had throughout my career has always been storytelling. But I think next to that has been innovation, because I believe the two are so tied together. If you think about innovation, you can't be an effective and influential innovator unless you are an effective and influential storyteller. And I think just the nature of storytelling, there is so much innovation in it, because you look at storytelling and it draws from inspiration from the things that you experience and connects the dots for people so they can see something that's possible that they didn't even realize was there before. So I think the connection is so strong throughout everything that I've always done.
Mm-hmm. Well, innovation is the make-believe world until it actually happens, right? So, I mean, what better tool than storytelling to create a new world, get people to envision it, get people to feel it, even though it has not yet come to fruition, test it out, and then see if you can make that fiction a nonfiction, a reality.
Exactly. And I think it's both are looking at the bridge between what is right now and what could be. One is creating the ideas, and one is making that idea believable for people.
Do you, in your innovation work, and we're going to jump into your 5-step process here in a minute, but when you are teaching or trying to trigger innovation or encourage innovation in a client, how do you use story or storytelling or reframing maybe the way they're looking at a challenge? How do you use that tool to open up their mind to innovation?
And I think it's one of the things that makes people relax more when you use the story, because I can't remember who said it, but it's the idea that nobody ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart. It's always about the story. And if you look at what do people remember most, they don't remember the numbers and the dates and all of those things. They remember the narrative. And even I start out with something that has nothing to do with their business or the work that they do or anything, but I'll say, what's one of the strongest stories that you remember from childhood? Everybody has it, right? It's so powerful. It's so ingrained. It's so memorable. And I'll say, do you remember what it was like when you were a kid and you heard this story? Because you probably heard it, many times, either around family holiday tables or every night before you went to bed, or something like that. So then the story starts to expand. And I say, what if you could do the same thing in your customer's mind now? Like, what if you could be such a clear story that they remember how they felt when they heard that story, that it resonated so strongly? It stayed with them for decades. And that's a way of thinking, of rethinking stories, their role in the work that we do, how sticky they are, and what they mean, not only to the people they want to tell them to, but to them and the people who are telling them. All of a sudden, it's not work. It's like, wow, I love telling this story, because we see how we can adjust it and modify it and tweak it and weave it. And it really is a fun thing to do.
All right. Now I'm going to use your own medicine on you. Carla, can you share one of your stories as a young gal growing up?
Young gal, absolutely. And this is a story that my children now know very well. And it was, my grandfather immigrated to the United States when he was 14. It was in 1913. And he talks about, he came with two of his aunts and a cousin, and they came through Ellis Island, and he was Danish and he didn't speak any English at all. And he and his cousin were separated from his aunts because it was, men to the right, women to the left. And he and his cousin came through the gates and were in the New York City side of Ellis Island, and his aunts were nowhere to be seen. And they had no idea what to do. And so they hid behind some crates and they waited, and the doors closed, and they didn't know it, but it was when the office closed for lunch. An hour later, the doors opened, and then a few minutes later, their aunts came walking out. And for him, it was this big sense of what happens in the world if I am now in this country when I don't speak, the language, and the fear and the apprehension and the excitement and anticipation and all of those emotions. So it's stories from my grandfather who immigrated from Denmark, I think, are ones that are so infused in my family and now passed down generations.
And what does that story mean to you in how you express it or identify with it in your own work around innovation?
For me, it's about that start before you're ready. And I think that's one of the hardest things when it comes to innovation and people being willing to try things or raise their hand or, share an idea, is that there's no right time. There's always going to be that scary time when you feel abandoned and left behind or forgotten, and you have no idea who's going to guide you through that. But the truth is, had they never seen my aunts again, it would have been fine, because if you're resourceful and, you can make your way. So that's what I look at that story. And my grandfather was incredibly resourceful.
You think about great innovators, the Steve Jobs, Elon Musks of the world, Oprah Winfrey in her own way. I mean, Madame Curie, you look at these folks and you really only ever see the 0.001% of them that really have that kind of impact that becomes iconic. Does that mean that really just a small handful of us can be innovative to any level that actually has some sort of impact?
And I think that's one of the misnomers about innovation, is that it has to be huge, disruptive, turn the world upside down kind of thing. But really, it's the accumulation of small, innovative ideas that really add up to those big things. If you look at something that people feel is so incredibly disruptive, like Uber and the transportation, in the that kind of industry, it wasn't that it was just so huge they just burst through into the marketplace out of nowhere. It was consistent little ideas that they had, that they could see this opportunity, that they put forward. And that's what made it look hugely innovative all at once. But what we forget is that there are so many incremental opportunities to bring great ideas to a process, to a situation, to a company that we don't realize. But the situation is that bad stories kill great ideas. And if you aren't able to tell the story of even the most magnificent idea in the world, it will never go anywhere. Imagine Steve Jobs up on stage talking about the iPod or the iPhone and just giving you the facts and features and showing you a bottom line price. I mean, it would have been ridiculous. It never would have gone anywhere. But one of the reasons Apple is so captivating is because of the incredible storytelling that Steve Jobs was able to partner, to pair with his amazingly innovative ideas.
The interesting thing to me about Jobs, at least from my own perspective, is, he was not a terrific presenter. He didn't have, amazing stage presence other than he was already an iconic figure. But what he did have were these great stories. And if you look at, I think the 2005 convocation address from Stanford, he gets up and he literally reads 3 stories to make his point. So there's no showmanship going on there at all, but fabulous storytelling. And of course, he had standing ovation again. His iconic, legendary dude that owns the stage in and of itself. But you don't have to be great at this stuff if you can tell a compelling story.
Absolutely, because that's what people remember. And they remember the story, and they remember how that story made them feel. And that's what I think gets lost so much in ideas and in innovation, is that we forget is that ultimately it's about the people, and it's about how we want to make them feel, the change that we want to help them have. And to your point, it's about what is it that you're doing in their world that makes such a difference to them. It has nothing to do with us.
Do you have a client or customer story you can share with us about that little incremental improvement or incremental innovation that led to something big?
Absolutely. It's a client that I work with in Switzerland, and I started working with them about 3.5 years ago. And they didn't label it as this at the time, but what they were wanting to do is to create a marketing group and ultimately a company culture that was more open to trying things, to storytelling. That's actually what I started out training them on, were storytelling techniques. And so for the first 6 to 9 months, it was teaching them the fundamentals of storytelling and how to apply it in social media, in marketing, in white papers, so that it's not just a single piece of content, but how do we start to connect all of these different pieces together in a greater story that you're trying to tell about the company? So as we moved from that, the next thing that we started to look at is, what are the skills that they needed to practice to become better storytellers? And so it moved from teaching to also teaching and feedback. And it was fascinating to watch how quickly and excited employees got about becoming storytellers now that they knew what to do. It was almost like the secret had been revealed, and it wasn't as hard as they always thought it was. And I think that's one of those things that happens with both storytelling and innovation, is that we have this idea that there are people who are naturals at it. You're either good at it or you aren't. And we don't realize it, that there are frameworks and there's processes that you can learn that don't have to be big and complicated and take a lot of time. You can learn little bits of them, little elements, and start to practice those right away and see that that can have an impact. What we looked at then is moving from storytelling and understanding that if the company wanted to instill not only storytelling as a skill, but also innovation and thinking like an innovator, then we started training with the executive team and said, let's define what innovation is and understand why we don't do it. Like, what are our own stories that we tell ourselves why we don't innovate? We typically think it's too complicated, it's too expensive, and I don't know how. Those are generally the top 3 excuses given why a person across an organization says they can't be innovative. Well, let's break all of those excuses down and understand how we start to deal with them from an executive leader point of view. And then the next thing that we did is to train the next tier of leaders across the company to say, this is the 5-step process to use that you can, then when we train all employees, is that you can use, especially as we go through digital transformation, to understand how your team can come up with ideas that help identify opportunities and start to solve problems that we know, both of which companies have all day long, but many times people don't know how to take advantage of them. So training like that. And what it led to, the next step was wanting to teach the entire employee base, and there was about 4,000 employees globally, is to teach them about digital transformation as an innovative way to do business. Because before COVID and before they started down this innovation journey, they were very traditional in how they interacted with their customers, printed things, everything was face-to-face, only events. There wasn't a sense of a need for a digital journey. And then my immediate client contact, she started there in 2016 and started down that road of digital transformation, and really looking then at last year, how it's almost synonymous, transformation and innovation, and how much the two come together. So she created, together we created a 2-day internal summit that essentially taught everybody how to think more innovatively about the work that you do, how it ties to digital transformation, and then breaking it down into 10 different subtopics, things like thought leadership, things like content as a business model, things like innovation as everybody's business, things like that. And now what we're seeing as we move into the next step of launching their internal innovation platform with the intention of garnering ideas from everywhere in the company, is that people have a better sense of this journey that they're on with digital transformation, whether it directly impacts what they do every single day or not. They have context and they understand decisions and things that are made at the executive level and how they trickle down. They now understand what they are and why they matter, and before they didn't have that sense. And I think in a way, that's how the company tells their story internally of being an innovator, because they're able to show the change that they've gone through actually very, very rapidly in only a matter of years. And in looking at now, we want to pull those ideas out of every nook and cranny in the organization and prove that innovation is everybody's business and opportunity. And they're now being lauded as a company that is a thriver when it comes to transformation and innovation by research groups. The London School of Economics has cited them and done a case study on them, and they're seeing media attention. And this is a way, when you look at that mindset and that culture of innovation, it does take time if you want to instill it across your whole culture. But starting with something just as simple as teaching a portion of your marketing team how to tell a better story is a great way to start down that path.
When you are teaching them how to tell a better story, what framework do you use to get their head around, oh, I can do this? Because so often I have found when you go in, and if you're thinking too big with the hero's journey and even the Pixar pitch way, it's too complicated for a lot of people to get their heads around. So I've boiled everything I do to begin with around the and, but, and therefore to really understand the 3 forces of story, of agreement, contradiction, and consequence. Build that first and then build onto it. What framework do you use?
Generally, because one of the common characteristics that I have with my clients is that they don't know how to put a story in the context of their customer. Or the next level, maybe they know that, like, the bigger brand story that, corporate communications or a PR group tells about the brand, but they don't know how to connect that into telling a story about a product. So I call that, it's like when you see kids do artwork, they have the mountains in the background and then the flowers right up front, but there's no middle ground. And so I talk to them about how to tell a story in a way that connects the dots with all of that, using information that they readily have that they can get from people anywhere in the company. Because a lot of times it's salespeople coming to them, it's product people, an engineer, it could be an executive. And what they hear are really just snippets, and it's really not an opportunity to understand and discover what's the real story that we need to tell here that matters to our customers. So I take them through the exercise of the 5 whys, because I find, especially for
I love
companies
that.
and storytellers who are stuck and really have a hard time, moving from brand centered things to customer centered things, even if they logically understand it, they don't know what to do when they sit down every day. And so that exercise of the 5 whys was started with Toyota with their lean process, but really asking the person who's requesting, information, is to say, like, why does this matter? It lands on 5 whys because it's generally an average between asking why 3 times or 7 times, and going through that process. And then when you're done, literally just flipping the order in which the answers were given to you. And all of a sudden you have a story narrative. And it is amazing, Park. I know that you have seen this as well. When people see this in action, I have sat and watched people. I think I've even, like, in my own head heard their angels sing and wah, just like in sitcoms when that happens. But it truly is magical. And the fact that they can see it happen so quickly like that and understand it makes them fans of storytelling like I have never seen before.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, back to feeling not only confident in doing something, but highly, highly competent, especially if you're a person who works with very left brain engineers. You feel very competent going into meetings now and pushing back and saying, wait, like, what does this really mean? Like, why do we need to say that or talk about this? And that feeling of confidence in the pushback, and really digging into what has meaning to the person you want to tell the story
Yeah.
to, is really powerful. And that's what ultimately builds a rapport between the storytellers and the people who want the story told, that those engineers and whoever else, product people, start to think differently as well. And I think that's a big part of how we rethink storytelling, how we rethink innovation, and also how we quit putting out so much stuff that doesn't resonate with anybody, that doesn't, it's content that's created that no one will ever care about and maybe never even use.
And I think of that 5 why exercise as we are always starting at a very high level with that first why, and we think that that's really the problem we're solving for, when it's not. That's typically just a symptom of the problem we're solving for. And it does take us. So why did that happen? And then, what caused that? Why did that, I'm getting my what's and my whys mixed up right now. But then why did that happen? And why did that happen, down to what you find to be the ultimate truth of the story. And to your point, it's a really great idea. I never thought of it that way, is now flip those answers on their head. Start with that 5th, 6th, 7th why, whatever it took you to get there. And that is the core of your story.
It is. And many times when you're taking somebody through that list of whys, why does that matter? Why does that matter? They haven't thought about it before. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden they start to realize how shallow that request was for the story that they want told. And then it helps tie it into what Clayton Christensen talked about. One of the most innovative minds we've ever seen is, what's the job to be done here? And that helps ultimately define it. And then it becomes a story that even an engineer can get excited about, that even a product manager, even a finance person can get excited about a story.
No way, not a finance person. No way. That's where I'm pushing back on you, Carla.
Who are up on the tables chanting, but they might raise their eyebrows, and that's a lot of expression.
They're giving you the polite clap thing.
Exactly.
Well, let's get into your 5-step perpetual innovation process, because it sounds like you first lead with story and getting people to being open to story, but now you take them by the hand through this process that helps stir innovation in them, if I've got that correct.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm going to mention this because I think it really matters in the context of our conversation, that I don't put this in as one of the 5 steps, but I have people start out with defining an objective, their objective statement. And it's a fill in the blank statement. And it says, we need new ideas to, so define what it is, why you need the new ideas, so we can, what's the outcome you want to happen, and then with these constraints. Because the sky's the limit with ideas if you don't have constraints, but we all live in the real world. And one of the things that makes idea people appear as flakes or non-realistic or things like that is when they don't live in the real world of constraints. But we don't want to start only with constraints, because that is the world we live in right now. That's why we hear things like, that's not how we do things around here, and all of these other excuses. But that sets context. So when I get into the 5-step process, I'll talk about where that comes up. But
it's interesting to me, Carla, that you start with objectives and not a goal.
It is because they're different. And I get into that in a deeper way in the book. But what we're looking at is, what are we truly trying to accomplish here? And the objectives can help you work toward that goal. The goal is the end line. You want to win the game.
So they've got a goal in mind already of some, and
Exactly.
You're coming in and say, okay, I see your goal here. Now let's go through this innovation process, and you are going to really focus on the objective or objectives at hand to reach that goal.
Exactly. So if you want to increase revenue, where there's a lot of objectives that you need to have in order to get there. So with the 5-step process, the first step is to observe. The second one is to distill. The third is to relate. The fourth is to generate. And the fifth is to pitch. So when I talk about observe, the world's most innovative thinkers and creative thinkers also are highly, highly observant people. And I always wave this around. You can't see it on the podcast, but my cell phone. It is one of the most detrimental things to innovative thinking that we have, because it absorbs every spare moment that we have. I mean, we give it too much time and attention. And all of the time that we spend on a phone or on our computer, on email, on social media, on all of these things, it narrows what we notice in the world. And people who are highly innovative, and I would say this is also very true of storytellers, because they notice the details, is that they are extremely observant of the world around them. They notice things that other people miss. And I remember talking to one executive who I found just amazingly innovative thinker. We had a conversation for over half an hour about the different icons on walk signals around the world and what they look like. In some places they have hats and a cane, and in other places it literally is a stick figure. And he had really, really observed all of this as a reflection of the culture of those countries. And I think a lot of people, if they travel, they may just say, "Oh yeah, there was a crosswalk, so I crossed when I got the walk signal." But did they really see what that signal looked like? And I have people go through this exercise of observing, because it's a way that helps them slow down. And I always say, start with a deep breath, and let it out. And now just stop and see everything that you can see around you. What do you smell? Close your eyes, and what do you hear? What do you feel? Can you taste anything? And it's really interesting, depending on if you're in a food court in a mall and you breathe through your mouth, you can taste the foods whether you realize it or not, because of your sense of smell. And we start to realize there is so much all around us all the time that we completely ignore. And it's a way to start to really slow down and open up our minds to take in the world around us. And then the second step is to, now that we've taken in all of these things, we start to distill it and we look for patterns. Now, what I found, Park, that was so interesting about these first two steps is that we as humans are genetically wired to do them all the time, everywhere, all day long, just as a matter of survival. And you've talked about this before, there's school, there's society that trains us out of doing these things. Don't observe what the sky looks like and draw it in purples and pinks and greens when you're in fourth grade, because that's too junior. That's not what it looks like. It's all of these things that we do naturally are trained out of us. But if you think about the reason we're here today is because our ancestors were very observant of the world around us, around them. They noticed signs of danger. When you move from observation into distilling, they could observe the grass on the savanna. Were the birds calmly eating in the trees, or were they flying in antelope running because there was a lion chasing them? So that connection between observing and distilling what you observed into patterns is something that really happens naturally once we relax our brain and give it room to do exactly that.
You had said earlier about the cell phone narrowing our notice. So it must have a real tremendous impact on both our observation. And as you were talking about that, I was just thinking about dinner we had with some friends last week, and everybody was sitting there with their damn phones and then taking pictures and doing, and then following up with other conversations. And I thought to myself, wow, what a missed opportunity to enjoy this great little pub up here in Flagstaff, the marvelous pizza, because we're all on our freaking phones. And then this idea of you observe it, and the genetics inside of us said, okay, our pattern-seeking brain is going to tell us about something that's happening in humanity as we're observing what's going on. But we can't do that when we're staring down in this little 9-inch phone in our hands.
Exactly. And the whole digital experience is designed to release dopamine in our brain constantly. So we want to be glued to those phones. There's a whole lot of neuroscience that goes around the habit that we have to break that I know you know. And so that's our habit, that we sit down and we're on our phones. And many times it's also this sense of, I think I'm going to miss out if I'm not on my phone, where really what we're missing out on is this amazing experience that you just described right in front of us, but we don't recognize those amazing opportunities because we aren't observing and paying attention. But you look at somebody who was on their phone during your dinner, did they remember an hour later what they observed? What was going on? But you look at you now a week later, who can describe in detail what that experience was like?
Yeah, I'm all about just leave the damn phone in the car. Let's go in and eat.
I'm with you 100%, 100%.
So you've got observe, you've got
distill.
Observe, distill.
Exactly. And then the third step is relate. And this really is where the magic happens. Because even if a person observes something, distills it, and skips the relate step, it turns an idea into something that's generally a copy and paste or a copycat. It's not truly innovative. And the reason is because in the relate step, we're looking at the essence behind that pattern. What is it that we observed that had meaning to us? So, for example, after the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge came out, many nonprofits were going, we need to do something like that. We need to do a viral challenge.
For everybody, the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was, for those that may not know?
It was this challenge that that ALS sent out to dump a big bucket of ice water over your head, or else write a check to contribute to the charity. And then once you had done either, you challenged somebody else. And so there were families doing videos of dumping ice buckets over there, ice buckets of water. It went crazy all over the world. Dolly Parton did it. People just really got online. So it was both the quirkiness of it, but also the shareability of it. And I don't remember off the top of my head what their donation increase was, but it was just through the roof, nothing like they'd seen before. Yeah. And so other nonprofits were thinking, we need to do something like just over the top like that as well. But what they didn't, and so when they tried to do that, it looked like a copy and paste, and people are like, I already did the ice bucket challenge. I don't need to do this. And so what they didn't understand is if they would have observed the challenge and seen things like it was about an actual action they could take Here's people dumping things over their head. Here's people sending challenges to people they liked or hated. And some people did the challenge 3, 4, or 5 times, and they wrote checks to an organization that they may have never heard of before. But when you start to look at distilling it into patterns, what made it successful were things like it was so easy to do. It was so easy to share. There's a little bit of like positive shaming if you were challenged and didn't do it. It was easy to have an out that still benefited that nonprofit. And so if you look at those things and said, how can I relate those patterns that I've distilled into what I'm about to do? How can I look at ways to make something easier to share? How can I look at building a community? How can I look at making it easy for people to either take action and increase brand awareness or write a check and contribute? That's where the relate step comes in. And now when you get to the 4th step, which is generate, then you come at that step from a completely different mindset. And what typically happens is when an organization needs a new idea or a team, they say, okay, let's get together, let's get on a Zoom call, let's get in a conference room, and let's just start brainstorming. Everybody start throwing out ideas. There's no such thing as a bad idea. And you and I, Park, we know most of those ideas are really awful ideas and they never go anywhere, and so there's the awful idea with a poor, if any, story at all. And it's no wonder that people say, I can't innovate. I'm not an innovative thinker, or my boss never lets me do anything, or my client is such a stick in the mud. It's because they don't understand the process that truly works for generating a great idea. And then the 5th step is the pitch. How do you tell the story of that idea? And with this process, the pitch is actually just going back and telling the story about, here's the objective that I know we're trying to wrangle, and we need these new ideas because we want to have this outcome, and we're struggling with these constraints. Well, it just so happened that I was at this pizza parlor in Flagstaff last weekend, and I noticed that everybody was on their phone. But what they were missing altogether was this amazing ambiance, the smells, the new unique pizza flavors that we've never had before. And I started to think of that, like, how could we start to relate that into the work that we're doing? How can we start to create this amazing experience that interrupts people's obsession with their phone and create something that's warm and enriching and rewarding, and use that as an opportunity to start to generate ideas. And it can be anything that captures your attention. Like we have our mutual friend, Tim Washer, who used to be a comedian. And he talks about when he worked at Cisco, he had a product launch for the ASR 9000, which is a big metal box with more wires and metal inside of it. And he said, typically what they do is they have an engineer, or an executive, and there's this talking head talking about, the great features and benefits of this new product. And he said, instead, we tried something different. So he had been at a comedy club and he saw Ray Romano up on stage, and he was talking about his in-laws and family and all of these things and kids, things that really resonated with the audience. And Tim said, as I observed what he did, he was able to build such a strong connection with the audience in a short amount of time by talking about things that really mattered to them and got them to laugh. So when he looked at what he observed and he distilled those patterns into quickly building relationships, using humor as a foundation, being able to talk about things that normally are pretty intimate, that people keep you, build up emotional walls and keep you at arm's length. And he said, how can I relate that into what I'm trying to do with this product launch? So with those patterns he distilled, he generated the idea of a 1-minute video that talked about the perfect Valentine's Day gift. And typically we think of Valentine's Day gifts as diamonds and candy and roses. Well, Tim was able to connect the dots and show that a great Valentine's gift would be this Cisco router, the ASR 9000. But he made it so funny so that when he pitched it, it made perfect sense. And if you would have walked in and just started with the generate idea with his boss and said, hey, I have a great idea. How about if we use a Valentine's Day theme to launch this product? There would be no context. there would be no, it would just be ridiculous. But instead, because Tim could tell the story that connected the dots and help people see why it worked and how that related into work that they were doing and how that inspired the idea that he had, it made perfect sense. So those are the kind of things that we miss. But when I did my research and I interviewed people, reverse engineering it from, amazing idea. What were you doing right before that? And what were you doing right before that? And going back, they all follow this process, whether they realized it or not. And when I went back and shared the process, they said, that's exactly what I did. Not only there, but it's what I did over here and over here and over here. And they could start to identify this as a regular process that helped them become an amazingly successful, innovative thinker.
Is this a process that revealed itself to you through not only your work, but the research for this book? Or was this a process you already had in hand that you were trying to proof out through your research?
No, it was actually a process that was revealed to me as I did these interviews. And what I did is that, little did I know, I went through, I observed everything that people were telling me. I distilled it into patterns, and then I tested it. I tested it with different groups and different kind of organizations, because I didn't want it to be something that just like a more creative type person did, or just marketers did, or something like that. I tested it across people in all sorts of areas within company. Even finance people have good ideas. And even finance people, I shouldn't beat up on the finance people, because I have some incredible stories of finance people who have used this to be amazingly creative and innovative. And so the opportunity is there. It's just that, and you've talked about this Park, that you see it being taught out of young people as we go through the school system, as we go through the university system, and it happens in the work world as well. And I think part of it is because 100 years ago, we were starting in the Industrial Revolution. And so we were going from chaos and unpredictability into, oh, wow, we can now measure things. We can now predict what's going to happen. And so that ability to measure became such a powerful tool for business to understand progress. So it was the amount of production, it was revenue. They could predict how much they were going to spend to make what they were going to make and how much they would sell. And if you look at that, then the educational system followed suit. They wanted to turn out students who could function in that business environment. It makes perfect sense. And then what they started to do is have academic assessments that are very left-brained, that determine, how well will the student do in a university environment, so that when we turn them into the real world, that they'll be able to contribute to these companies. And now what we see all these years later is that it has gone so much to process things, to how do we make this happen for the shortest amount of money. And that's been the shift toward offshoring and outsourcing and things like that. But now what we have is a new wave of generation of younger people who are like, wait a minute, this isn't all about what we make and how much we make. Why are we even making this? And I think that's been a big thing that we've started to see these last 20 years is purpose and how that comes into business. And there's nothing that needs amazing storytellers more than purpose, right?
So, Carla, let's end this show with the Carla Rethink Innovation Ice Bucket Challenge. And what I'm saying is we often throw cold water on our best ideas because we think we're not up to the task. We don't think we're good enough. We're not a Steve Jobs or a Maya Angelou. We're just us. Well, that's BS. Let's call BS on that and throw that out the window. So would this make sense? And I'm just learning this for myself here too. Any listener out there that has a challenge at hand that you have yet to have an answer for, I want you to go through the 5 steps. Put your doggone phone down. Go out and observe the world and what's happening in the world around you. Then distill that. And I guess by distilling, it's start to connect the dots of what you see happening there that may be impacting, good or bad, what is happening to you at that time. Relate it to where you are and to what that positive outcome can be. You're going to be completely telling yourself a fiction at this point because you don't know if you can actually make this happen. But if you build that backstory through observation and distilling it, then you can relate it to what a better tomorrow would look like. Then start generating that. Do something. Go and share it with someone. Share it with us. Send Carla an email. Can I volunteer your email to send them to you if they're thinking about an innovation?
Absolutely. I would love to hear. I would love to hear from people. Yes.
And get the pitch. What is the pitch? And see if you can pull that ice bucket off of your ideas and literally run with it and see what in the heck
Absolutely.
happens.
And if anybody wants a short, I call it a field guide to walk through this process, send me an email. I'm happy to send it to you. And it's a little bit of a shortcut. And I will give people a word of caution is that once you start with the observation stage and take time to really observe and be present in the world around you, and then distill those into patterns, because that is genetically really natural to us. Once you reawaken that, you're going to find it happens all the time. You'll be in the grocery store, you'll be in traffic, you'll be out for a run, and you'll find your mind just really does it. And I hear from people who say, I started this and I can't turn my brain off. Don't worry, it'll even out. But what you'll find is that all of a sudden you'll have so much that you're taking in that you will have ideas coming like this all the time. Even if you don't have an objective that you're working toward, you'll just find that you naturally become this incredible idea generation machine. Now the challenge is to manage it all.
Put down the phone and start observing life.
That's right.
Carla, thank you so much for being here. Where can people learn more about you and get your wonderful new book, Rethink Innovation?
The best place is check out my website, Carla with a C, Johnson.co. There's no M on that. And there's information there about my book. There is information about the different workshops and things that I have. And there's also an assessment that you can take about what kind of innovator that you are, because everybody comes up with ideas differently. Everybody tells us stories about them differently. And when you take the assessment, let Park and I know what you are. I'll be curious to hear.
That sounds like a whole other episode here to have you back and talk about the different character traits of different kinds of innovators.
That would be great. I would love that.
I would too. Well, thank you, Carla. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be here today, Park. After all these years, we finally got to sit down. I loved it.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what you heard, please share it with your friends, family, colleagues out there. Rethink Innovation. It's a fabulous book. And what else is in it is not only does Carla show off her storytelling chops because she makes every business point with the story she tells, there are also a lot of wonderful worksheets and exercises that you can use right now to fire up that innovator inside of you. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. If you have yet to take the ABTs of Selling course, check it out. In under 18 minutes through 3 short videos with me, I am going to walk you through the 3 forces of story of agreement, contradiction, consequence, and how you can use this not only in your innovation, but in how you are going to sell that innovation with that singular theme, that focused message that our limbic system absolutely loves. It plays to that pattern-seeking system that Carla talked about earlier. So that's the ABTs of Selling. You can check it out at businessofstory.thinkific.com. And until next Monday, when we will have another fabulous story artist right here for you like Carla, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.